Okay, in this one we're going to be going over the war on drugs, why it's on its negative consequences and why it needs to end. Now, first of all, with it, we're going to be looking at the war on drugs with it, and we can actually show on the actual cost of the war on drugs with it up to uh, where we look at on up to 2017, and you can actually see that. Let me see if I can get an actual amount. That one doesn't show it. Let's look. This one's on 2018. This shows, I believe, this is from Forbes, and basically it shows that it's about $78 billion a year. Now, this is basically showing that it's and you'll see that it's basically overall with it, we've actually pretty much about, we're talking like roughly 4% of our debt as the current rate. This is not including our cost of incarceration or even our local debt. But we're talking basically is we're talking about 4% of our debt is actually directly linked to the war on drugs, and that should be very, very disturbing. And when we start to look at that, is just within that alone, when we start to just view it in that point, we're not even viewing into what actually causes beyond what the actual causes beyond that are. We're just looking at the debt perspective. And when we start to view that, we can actually see that that is actually harming on the economy. Now, when we start to view on the next part, we're going to see that when we start to view the actual things of the overdoses. Since the war on drugs started, the overdoses have actually gone well up. You can actually look in the Cato's tracking on the cost of war on drugs. The actual war on drugs is actually accelerated because it creates drugs of a taboo nature. And when you're doing this, you're basically kind of dangling over kids as don't do drugs, and you're basically kind of encouraging them to do drugs. Now, if you don't want them to stop doing drugs, your best solution is actually very, very simple. Eliminate the actual barriers on it, because people do not abuse things like Tylenol. They're not using any of these other things like that, and they're doing it in very, very small cases. We found it basically in our prohibition on alcohol. When we created a prohibition on alcohol, the alcohol consumption went way overboard. And then when we started to eliminate it, the actual alcohol. In fact, if you go to the Philippines, when it comes to alcohol alone, they are what are called, they are far more relaxed than even some of the most relaxed states here in the United States. When it comes to alcohol, the drinking age is 18. They even have 24-hour bars within many areas, and 24-hour bars are open for the weekends, usually Thursday, like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday type of thing. And on Sunday, with it, they close at midnight. And yet, when you look at their accident report, they don't have any accidents. They're not having DUIs, and that's because there is a sense of personal responsibility. And they're not staying there all night and drinking. They're only having a few beers and leaving. They're not getting plastered. And the same thing. And basically, it's because when you have these things, it basically puts more responsibility on the person that they need to keep up with. And while you will have some people that will abuse it, they're going to have to pay for their own responsibility. The more the government steps in and tries to make it a nanny state, the more issues you're going to have. Now, this is essentially what's happening in the United States and what happens in these other countries. That's way off the chart. That actually leads to a lot of deaths. You look at Australia as another one. People would think that the Netherlands would be high with it, but they're far lower than either of these two. And what makes it is this prohibition. And what we could do with it is when people say that they're worried about things like fentanyl, heroin, cocaine. These are things that they're most worried about. Well, the fact is you need to use market resources for how to deal with it. Is they're coming in from Mexico, Afghanistan, Colombia, China. These are the places where they're coming in from, as well as methamphetamine is coming in from Mexico as well. So when you're worried about these things, the best thing to do is to make it legal, because what you're doing is then you're creating an opportunity for the prices to get down, because there's no black market anymore. When you have a black market, this raises the cost, and when you have the cost going up, this is something which is going to cause a lot of if the actual price of what people are willing to pay drops below actual production value with it, where it would be effective, then what ends up happening is it ends up dropping out of the market, because the actual ability for them to move the product is not affordable anymore, such as producing cocaine in Colombia. The ability for them to do this, because these are usually poor farmers who, this is where it starts. These poor farmers are producing them uh, out there in Colombia, and then it moves on through this different supply chain, and this is how it gets to the United States. Well, if you start to reduce, if you eliminate the black market, well, this is going to slide down the price, and those farmers are going to say it's not affordable to produce this because we're not making any money off this. We're barely making anything off this in the first stage of the production of producing it and getting it out to the farmers. You need to produce it at a lower cost. Well, they're going to tell the people we're not going to do it anymore. This then would essentially virtually, in many cases, eliminate the production of at these sites. You could have essentially cocaine be completely eliminated. Cocaine would be completely gone because of this. When we have things like methamphetamine would most likely be gone, because the actual shipping costs would be far greater than the actual dangers that it would be worth. And for the actual what would cause them trouble with it. So when people that were making it, they don't want to actually have that high risk of actually developing methamphetamine. And then what they have to do is they have to develop methamphetamine, and then on top of that, they have to deal with all the risks of developing it. And then after that point, they'd have to uh, take the methamphetamine and bring it to the distributors, and they're making more money like that. That's another thing like that. That's essentially a stimulant, which would be alternative to cocaine. Now the fact is it's not going to sell. It doesn't sell as high as cocaine, and it's basically it takes more and more levels to move it. And they would also have to pay the different things as any other product coming in for customs. And the fact is, they would drive up the cost even more. And the fact is they wouldn't be able to. People would not be willing to pay that. There might be some local producers here who are willing to take the risk, but the fact is, overall, with it, it would actually shrink down the market. Amount of cost is going to go up with it, because they're going to pay the customs charges for anything coming in, just like a normal item. And what's going to happen is when it comes in, is there's going to be massive cost on the obviously medicinal bad, but this when we're talking about this would not be able to be be considered on that level, and they're not going to pay for that. Then we go to the idea of heroin. Heroin is basically, we're talking for like all the heroin produced is all coming out of Afghanistan. Some's coming out of Pakistan, but mostly out of Afghanistan. That was basically the huge bump that came after we invaded Afghanistan, and pretty much that's what ended up occurring. And it was basically a direct cause from that war. Uh, so what ended up, so what would end up occurring is that as we cut the war on drugs, it would no longer have that thing, and it would no longer be worth that long travel, because that's a massive long travel itself is far more lucrative. Now, in comparison with other things with it, yes, things like marijuana or something like that, and people who could actually make purchases of actual items. Number one, economically, beyond just the drugs, because you're actually putting them in jail for something which is a nonviolent crime. That's number one. Uh, Number two is the actual tax on it, uh, and you can actually do that, and it would be just fine. You could do a sales tax on it, and that would actually develop money with that. With the war on drugs, all it's doing is creating a negative. Going to go haywire, and everybody can commit crimes. Well, the fact is when we jail these people, they end up in jail with people who are hardened criminals, and they usually rise up with this, and they usually rise up to the ranks and become violent criminals because of that, because of their association. They have to learn how to deal with these situations out there, and they can become a violent criminal just within the association. And that's what ends up happening. And so it ends up creating something which is an unintended consequence. And we need to realize this and eliminate the war on drugs, because the fact is the war on drugs is very, very bad for our. This is unbelievably insane, because we're wasting money. We're actually chewing up money in the judicial system, and we're actually taking people out of the economy itself, and that's the actual solution. So things like uh, certain things that would actually uh, do some good, they never want to actually go toward that. Now, if you end the war on drugs, this not only saves us a lot of money, this essentially gets us out of a lot of countries when it comes to war. It ends our involvement of many, many countries because of this. Um, it would essentially force many countries to essentially abandon their production of drugs, because drugs would be far too low in the actual cost for what people would purchase them for, because the way the market would go, and then it would that's a far cry from that, because we look at our incarceration. You have to think about 9 in every 10 people are incarcerated just on drugs alone, and in many cases these are very, very long sentences, like draconian. We want to actually be